What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the ever-evolving, never-ending, Ready, Set podcast. All right, so today we're going to talk about something that I did not see coming up on the horizon, and that is the Bears having the number one draft pick. And I guess, ironically, we can say thanks to Lovie Smith for that one, the Texans head coach, who was, I think, one of the Bears' wins that they had against this year. Who they beat this year? It was like San Francisco, the Texans, and I couldn't even tell you that third win was. It was probably early on in the season, and it doesn't matter because the Bears, for some reason, have the first round pick, which is crazy to me because going back, I would say about 8 weeks, I remember discussing this with the old man, and we were just thinking maybe a top 5 pick at the very least. And then they go from, they've been playing very bad down the stretch. I can't remember the last time they were really even competing in a game. Actually, I can, and then they missed an extra point, and they lost to the Dolphins. And I believe we've talked about that before, but it's been a long time since the Bears were competing, and they weren't really that bad. They had a really great rushing offense. The defense was questionable, and Justin Fields' passing game was, his running game, his deception. It's all amazing, but with quarterbacks like that, you generally want to see them be able to perform in the pocket. And as the season was going on, he was definitely getting better at that. So to see that was very good because the Bears team, I'd say since the end of the Cutler era, even during the Cutler era, even I'd say so, but even more so if we're going to kind of focus on here, seeing the Bears progressively progress, get a little bit better each time, that doesn't really happen. Not at all, if anything. So for them to turn around and get this number one draft pick, it's quite impressive. Well, it's impressive in its own right, I guess. So the big thing that starts being talked about now is, well, what do they do with this number one pick? We have a quarterback, so do we? What do we do? Do we trade down? And there's a lot of speculation. This is why sports and sports talk media does really well because you could sit there and just talk about it. The woulda, coulda, shouldas, and what we should do, what they shouldn't do. 6 ways from Sunday until the day it happens. And then obviously the narrative changes. But what do they do? You have the number one draft pick. And that gives you a lot of flexibility, especially when you already have a quarterback. Because generally teams that are picking in those spots, I know the sky is blue, but they generally need to have a quarterback. But if you're a team like the Bears and you have your quarterback already, you kind of find yourself in a, and not to mention, they have the highest cap space out of all teams. I think it's in the 155 million range, maybe, on the 150 range, something like that. But that's a lot of coinage to be thrown around for free agency, and you can take all that money and then plug in where you need to when the draft comes. But the question becomes, what do you do? What do the Bears need? Do they have to resign anybody? These are questions that need to be answered. So I can't decide if I want to. Okay, let's do this. All right, I want to talk about. Let's actually go to the video. I'm going to do that. So Rich Eisen. Let's look at this Rich Eisen video, and then we'll go from there. Let's see what Rich has got to say. This is about the Bears possibly drafting down, taking the pick, and he's going to kind of talk about what I think the Bears should do.
But this is going to be a non-stop conversation between this day and draft day.
Oh, yeah. Always and forever.
Non-stop conversation. I'll tell you what I think they should do.
Well, trade the pick.
I think, or
no,
I don't know.
Trading the pick's
Will
a bad
Anderson
move.
is, or Jalen Carter, or
what did he say there?
I don't know. What if Will Anderson is, or Jalen Carter, or there's a defensive player out there that's their brand. That's your brand.
Yeah.
Your brand is.
So he's definitely right about this. And if you look at the top 15, I looked at the top 15 total players, offense and defense, and only so you could get an idea of the quality of players of the best player available. And the majority of off the top of my head, it's between 5 and 6 quarterbacks, maybe 3 or 4 ends, and I think maybe 2 of those ends are top tier, maybe 1, and one of them is Will Anderson. Jalen Carter, I think, is the other, and then there's a few tackles in there, but the quality of defensive players seems to be more on the end, and there seems to be more ends than there are tackles. And as you know, getting to the quarterback, that's going to be That's what's important. Now for the Bears, they're in this 3-4, they're in the 4-3 system now. So, having that interior lineman is very important. I mean, look at Aaron Donald, however you say that guy's name, when he was good 10 years ago. Like, if you have that interior lineman, you can create a lot of havoc. You can take average linebackers with a decent end or interior lineman and make those linebackers all-stars. That's the importance of the D line, and I think that's where the Bears need to spend that draft capital.
Bears,
the monsters of the Midway, man.
is a Bears organization. That is your brand, and then what's off-brand and newfangled is your current quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, this is true because the Bears, they generally look at their history. They don't have these, like Jim McMahon. I mean, you can't even name a Bears quarterback. I mean, the last one that was actually passing the ball was Sid Luckman, and that guy was taking snaps for them almost 100 years ago. And Jake Cutler broke most of his records when he played for the Bears. So you can see that Bears, the Bears have always been about running the ball. And actually, I'm going to jump ahead to prove that point even further here, because what we have is a question that everyone's been asking. When was the last time the Bears had the number one pick other than when was the last time the Bears had the number one pick? They've haven't had first round picks going back to whenever, but when was the last time they've had a number one pick? And what I find fascinating about this is this explains why the Bears have been mired in mediocrity for so long. So let's go to that article really quick. So you have the first one they had is right down here. In 1941, the Bears took another halfback. A halfback? Why would the Bears take a halfback? Well, let me tell you why. Because back then, the NFL was all about running. T formation, anyone? Does that sound familiar? The wishbone formation? 3 running backs? That's what the NFL was. I even think passing for a long period of time, you weren't allowed to throw a pass unless you were 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And I believe there was a game that was contested based on that, but they didn't have replay back then. And then I think there was a championship the Bears played that was in such bad weather in the winter, they had to move the game into Chicago Stadium and then play this championship game on an 80-yard field. I mean, why no one talks about that is, pretty crazy because recently with DeMar Hamlin, you had a seeding implication game that they canceled. I mean, that was kind of a big deal for a billion-dollar business to say, we're just going to kind of, not do anything because we're scared of our own shadow and what other people are going to say on Twitter, and we're just not going to do anything. And, the difference between the 30s, was that the NFL was basically like a mom-and-pop shop, and it was just kind of being run on a whim, where now you have this billion-dollar, it's to cancel a game. I understand the circumstances, but for me, who's been watching football for almost 40 years now, 35 years roughly, it's obvious that you got a lot of these, softies up in the office in New York who are able to make these decisions because nobody would have canceled that game 20 years ago. I mean, regardless of this situation, like, I get it. Like, it's, we're trying to be sensitive to what's going on, but, like, this is a football game with implications in a billion-dollar business. To say, like, we'll just work around that, that just comes off a little irresponsible. And, yeah, I get it. It's a game, but it's also a game attached to $30 or $30 billion. So, you know what I mean? You can't have it both ways, and that's what communists like to do. So, anyway, back to what we were talking about here. So, we have the Bears taking a halfback, Tom Harmon, out of Michigan. This sounds familiar with how the Bears handle things. Never signed with the Bears, probably because the old man was too cheap to actually pay him. And instead went on into movies and radio, served in the military during World War I, and then played for the Rams after coming home. Well, what about the second pick? It probably worked out better for the Bears, didn't it? So in 1947, the Bears selected halfback Bob Fenimore first overall, which is very fascinating because the Bears had the first overall pick after, where is it here? Was it up here? It doesn't matter. I thought this said that they selected the halfback Fenimore first overall. The last time Chicago had the first overall pick. Think about that. In 1947 was the last time the Bears had the first overall pick. And you wonder why they haven't won anything, It took them almost 40 years to win another Super Bowl because they are mired in mediocrity. In the 60s, they were able to pick Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus almost back-to-back. And, they won a few NFL championships with that. But guess what? They haven't won dick in the Super Bowl era. And a lot of that is because in the Super Bowl era, they have yet to have a first pick. Right? Do you disagree? If you disagree, get down in the comments and you tell me what you think. Because I see you Bears simp fans out there. You're always simping for the owners. You got those. You can't take those pom-poms and put them in your back pocket. Why can't you do that, bitch? Can you tell me? I bet you can't, and those comments are going to probably stay at nothing. Or maybe you think I'm right. Blow me up. Tell me I'm right. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. So the Bears have this pick, and they basically blow both of them, and then they don't have another one for almost, 75 years. It is crazy. But let's go back to this Rich Eisen video really quick.
That's another option, too. But trading the choice.
Linebacker at number 1 is
wild.
Not a thing that happens.
But, linebackers also rush the passer, too. I don't know.
Maybe Micah Parsons on a redraft would go number 1.
Like I was just saying earlier, like linebackers do rush the quarterback, but if you have a solid defensive line, if you have a linebacker that could just at least, execute at a basic level, he's going to get to the quarterback.
Don't you think? I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff against the wall right now.
That's
Thursday,
what
April
sports radio and
27th in
sports
Kansas
talk
City.
Between
is
now and
these
that
days.
date, this is the conversation because the Bears are number 1 and Lovey helped make it happen. Of all,
Yeah, that's what's even crazier is that this was helped by Lovie Smith. It makes you wonder, did Lovie know he was going to get fired and this was his way to, kind of spite the team? It's quite amazing how that played out. I had no idea. I saw that they won, that, they beat the Colts or whatever it was. It's crazy that Lovey ended up assisting the Bears at that number 1 pick. You just can't write this kind of stuff, So my whole philosophy with the Bears is that they need to basically stick to the best player on the board. Draft that playmaker. Now, if for some reason, as, you got the combine coming up, you get more information on these guys that you're trying to invest in, and you find out, okay, maybe we don't want to put our draft capital here. There's nothing wrong with trading down if that is the case, but if you end up being wrong about Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, well, that's the Bears for you, right? Look at what happened with the last time they had the number 1 picks. They couldn't even sign the guys, and one of them went off to do a career in radio and TV in the military. Now, I will say in their defense, those NFL players were making dick back then. So, taking another career, it does make sense. But, again, this is the Bears. This is, there's proof to why they have been mired in mediocrity for so long. So the question becomes, do they trade Justin Fields? Do they draft the playmaker? Obviously, trading Justin Fields is a no-go. And I'm going to explain why. And that's because you have your quarterback. You know what he is. You know his abilities. You can tailor an offense around him. Now you've had, almost 2 seasons worth of data on the guy, Now's the time you need to put people around him. Give him the tools to be the right carpenter, if you will, or, give him the ingredients to cook the right meal. And if you give him these ingredients, you give him the finest quality, herbs and spices there are, and he can't fry up that chicken correctly, then you move on and find another guy. But until then, Justin Fields is your guy, and what you need to do is, I would actually go with the Bill Polian route, and that is you have your quarterback, you find playmakers, you plug them in either through the free agency, later in the draft, because you're not going to find, a top-tier wide receiver that's worth being picked in the top 5 picks. It's just, even if you trade down, I think that's too big of a risk on a wide receiver. You could plug that in somewhere else and build, find a rookie wide receiver playmaker. Maybe later on somehow we can talk for years about that. But the point is, if they build this defense, they put a defensive end or an interior lineman in there to, create more situations where the Bears defense can get to the quarterback, that's going to be beneficial to the offense. And let me tell you why. Again, if you know Bill Polian, you already know where I'm going with this. Because if the Bears keep finding themselves in a lead, if they can they already have a top rushing team. That is, if they can re-sign David Montgomery, or find someone else to run in his place. He is 27. He's gonna be almost 30 when that contract ends if he does re-sign. So that's a little iffy right there. But what do you do with the running back? But the point is, with the defense, if you have a solid offense that can score points, and then you have these guys on defense that you've drafted, you can just, pin their ears back and tell them to go get the quarterback. Because what's going to happen to a team when they're down, 7-0, 14-0, going into the second quarter or even into the second half? They're going to start passing the ball. Nobody runs the ball when you're down, 2 possessions or, 7 points. Maybe with your, 3 points, you can run the ball, get to where you have to go. But generally, if you're down 7 points, 14 points, going into the second half, even being in the second quarter, you're going to find yourself in an offensive situation where you're being a little bit more aggressive by passing the ball. And that puts the Bears defense with these interior linemen in a more advantageous spot because, like I said, you can just send the house, not really, but, find a way to get to the quarterback knowing that they're going to be passing, on at least 2/3 of the downs, or at least 50% really, or 2/3, 66 to 75% of the downs. If they are, in a 1 or 2 possession game, they're definitely going to be passing the ball a lot. And that's why I think the Bears should spend the majority of this capital that they have towards, the first round on this interior lineman. Now, I said if the situation presents itself where they can acquire more draft capital, I am all for that. But with this current, draft order, I don't really know if that situation is going to present itself. And that's what's going to bring me back to this Rich Eisen video is the draft order. So I'll just let him kind of take it and we'll react from there.
The one you'd have
My bad. I almost thought I got through a whole episode without doing that.
you wouldn't have to go you can't fall very far.
Well, you trade it to the Colts or Texans, right?
Well,
right. Okay. So this is what they're talking about. So let's say you decide, okay, I am going to trade this pick. This pick is open. Anyone who's got a draft package, send it my way, and I will let you know. Now, here's the problem, though. Okay, let's do it this way. Which teams have a quarterback? I believe the Cardinals fall into that. They're not trying to move on from Kyler Murray. However, they've got a new coach coming in. So they're a wild card. You don't know, and maybe that could work to your advantage, and you can use that to trade up. But the problem here is you have a lot of teams. Actually, it's a good thing. It's not really a problem per se. But here's the issue, and this is kind of what they're talking about: is where do you trade down into? You can't fall. You can't have the number 1 pick and then start picking down here at 7, 8, 9. The Bears. I remember the Bears had the 4th pick in the draft, and that was when they ended up passing over a guy named Aaron Rodgers and drafting Cedric Benson, who basically ended up doing exactly what the other 2 first-round draft picks they had in 41 and 47 that were also halfbacks, is they barely played with the Bears. So the question becomes, let's say the Seahawks, they after my assumption of a bad Geno Smith playoff game is on the horizon, they're going to probably want to move on from him. So what do they, do they have, this is a pick from Denver. They could trade this pick, the pick they have later on in the first round, and then whatever future capital they have, because, they definitely have some from that Russell Wilson trade. And now they can move up into that number 1 spot and have the pick of the litter for the quarterbacks. Now, for the Bears, they would obviously, fall down to 5, have an extra 1. That's actually not that bad. But the problem is, is Will Anderson going to be on the board? Are these 3 teams, they need a quarterback. But do the Cardinals? Are they done with Kyler Murray? I don't know. And I think that's kind of what they're talking about here. And I kind of agree with that assessment.
Well, the Texans, but would the Texans give you a 1 next year just to move up 1 spot? I doubt it.
No.
If they love.
Not for 1 spot.
I doubt it.
That's not worth it.
The Colts.
You don't trade that down to the Texans.
Who else would come up and get somebody that they loved so much? The Seahawks? I don't know. You sit right there.
Raiders.
Yeah, but if the Seahawks see something that they really, if they're, if there's a guy that they really like, the Bears did it. They went and got Mitch Trubisky, and look how that worked out for them. They got desperate, they got scared. Maybe if I'm the Bears, and I believe Ryan Poles did say this, is you don't let anyone know what you're doing. If I'm Ryan Poles, I'm gonna publicly say, I'm gonna go to Justin Fields and be like, hey man, in the press, we're gonna say a few things, just ignore it. We're just trying, we just got a few tricks up our sleeve here. And you're like, Justin Fields, if there's a package that I like, you never know. It works the same way. Like if the Bears, let's say the Bears get some inside information and they find out like, oh, Seattle likes C.J. Stroud, and the Bears like, we're thinking we're going to trade Justin Fields. We're going to go in a specific direction. Maybe you like secretly leak to the Seahawks. That's what you're up to. And then all of a sudden a trade package comes in. Again, I understand this is, very, 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 very not likely to happen. But again, it's the NFL. You just don't know how any of these things are going to play out.
The Raiders.
The Raiders seem like
The Raiders.
Tom Brady or
That was for you, Dad.
drafting a guy.
Well, they just. Well,
The Raiders. The Raiders.
Chris, they were just evaluating Jarrett Stidham. Didn't you hear that? They wanted to see what they had in him, even though it's not like the mystery man to Josh McDaniels.
You know what I mean?
He's had him in his system for years.
By the way,
Okay, now these guys are getting a little wonky here. So the Bears, like we was alluding to earlier, have $155.9 million in cap space. So what are they going to do with that? Well, I can tell you if they sign, David Montgomery, Riley Reif. Actually, let's go to, I have a page here where we can look at all of that. I want free agents. All right, so we're going to slip over here. So here you can see, I was blown away by this. Brian Pringle was making $4.1 million. The guy didn't even do anything. Like, what kind of maybe that was just a plugging guy. And so I don't see them re-signing him. Riley Reif, 34 years old. I mean, if I would say this, if they can't find a tackle and they are desperate, I would re-sign him. And maybe next 20, Morrow would be a good backup role. But let's go down. Where is it? David Montgomery. This is what. Oh, so I was wrong. He's 25 years old. Okay, so they need to re-sign David Montgomery. And if you look at the market value of what a running back is, so the calculated market value is 7.2. Okay, so that's what they're thinking might count against the cap for the Bears. Now, are there any other re-signing moves they're going to make in here? To be honest with you, I don't know. A lot of these guys these are all like reserve guys. You know what I mean? So what the Bears decide, Joe Thomas was good. I thought would be a good re-sign. I mean, most of these guys, their salaries split pretty low. I mean, as long as they're not signing them to these, two big long-term deals. What's the market value on Morrow here? So 3.8. Okay. So the Bears could probably get out of re-signing a few of their guys and, still having, and I'm going to go super over the top. Let's say they spend $20 million on re-signing, their own players. We'll say 30 when you start including the draft, okay? So at a bare minimum, the Bears are going to have about $120 million to spend going into the draft, into free agency, which, is first before the draft. So they're probably going to have to reserve about, $30 to $50 million for guys that they want to re-sign and then sign through the draft. So that's going to leave them with, we'll say, about $110 million, which is, it's a lot, but it's not. Because if you want a top-tier free agent, which I don't recommend the Bears do unless an opportunity presents itself and that player is worth the money you're spending, which generally it isn't, but let's say it is, you might have room for one guy you could pay $20 million a year to. Now that's going to leave you with another $80 million. But you play enough for these, football games where you're the general manager and, $100 million can go pretty quick. You know what I mean? Especially in today's days where a dollar isn't worth, a dollar anymore. So what should they spend this money on? I guess that's going to depend what's out there. And, the season's not even over. So I haven't even looked at, what free agents are out there, who wants what. I have not done that deep of a dive yet. But what do the Bears need? Their offensive line struggled. They had a great rushing offense, but they need some guys that can, pass block. So there has to be an adjustment there. Maybe they bring in an offensive line or two. Again, if you got enough draft capital, I would just, maybe bring in one or two guys through free agency and then try to build the rest of that offensive line through the draft, which they have been doing over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, we need a wide receiver. And like we were saying earlier, in the draft, there doesn't seem to be someone that you could just plug right into the system right away. So that's going to suggest that they're going to have to go to free agency to find that guy that can, be. I mean, they got that Claypool. Was it Claypool from the Steelers? But I mean, he was brought in so late that there's only so much a guy can do when you're trying to learn a completely different offense. So yeah, they might have to go the free agency route to find a playmaker wide receiver. I mean, can you imagine what Allen Robinson would be doing, in an offense like this? The guy, he's definitely getting older, but it would have been nice to have him. But obviously, the Bears weren't going to pay him. So yeah, that's the Bears they're definitely in a situation here, and I really hope they don't mismanage this situation. And basically, what I think is going to happen, they're going to sign David. They're going to sign David Montgomery. They might sign Riley Reif. But yeah, I just don't see them really making too many moves beyond that. I like Joe Thomas, Nicholas Morrow, but these guys aren't anyone who's going to be signing $10, $15 million a year contracts. And if they do, that's on you, Ryan Poles. Yeah, and as for the draft, don't get fancy. Like, if there's a draft package out there that wows the Bears, that allows them to set up, this team through the draft over the next, few years, this year, the next year, maybe the next one, maybe I would be okay with that. But don't get cute. Don't try to outthink everyone. Just grab your playmaker. Look what Aaron Donald did for the Rams. Before the Rams had him, that Rams defense was trash. And then look what happened. They won a Super Bowl recently, Now, if you notice, they won the Super Bowl, and they haven't really done much this year. I think they won that last year, right? Whatever. I can't remember. But obviously someone took their foot off the gas a little bit, But, hey, a Super Bowl is a Super Bowl, right? It's hard to win in the NFL. So yeah, that's what I think the Bears need to do. This, just don't get cute. Stick to your plan. If someone throws a draft package at you that you can't turn down, just go. Just yeah, I would do that. But all right, I'll caveat it this way. We'll do this. If you get an offer from a team that allows you to still kind of pick in the first top 5, maybe top six, or that basically allows you to get that top defensive lineman, fine. I'd take that package. But if it's anything that is offered to you that strays from that, I would avoid it like the plague. Because the Bears, I'm telling you, they cannot blow this. They have an opportunity right now to build a very, very good team that can compete, through the early part of Justin Fields' career at the very least. And they're going to have to execute very well to do this. And that's why I think they should just stick to the plan, get the defensive line guy, build, plug and play through free agency. Build a team through the draft, plug what you can through free agency, and then, hopefully we have a season where we're not just sitting there watching this team just lose week after week after week. So the final question I have to ask before we get out of here is, will the Bears actually build a winning team? I almost feel like that's the overall theme to the episode. And I can only, answer that question with a question. Can the Bears even build a stadium? We'll see you next week, you fucks. Have a good one.